Yes.
Woo!
And I just
Happening.
finished my apple a day to keep the doctor away, and that's what's up.
Wow.
Wait, what's up, man? I don't. So, what's interesting is I, as much as I respect everything that is in the wrestling and MMA world, I'm nowhere near as invested in it as my two podcast partners here. So, I don't know really anything about you other than what Jordan and Justin have told me. So I'm kind of coming into this one today blind and excited to see why these guys have been literally texting in the group chat how excited they are. I'm totally blowing up, specifically Jordan's spot right now.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Come on now. So let me just say, look, we've had an A-list celebrity on here. We often have musicians that regularly perform to thousands of people. I think this is up there with my childhood musical hero that we had come to my apartment a couple years ago. This is up there with like the most like good nervous butterflies I've had for any of these episodes.
That's pretty huge.
I took a scroll through your iTunes catalog, and I'm like, man, Donnie Wahlberg, damn, like to be up there with that as what you're saying, that what an honor.
But the interesting thing is that when he sees this published, he's going to think the same thing on the flip of like, whoa, they got Wai Ting. What an honor for me to open up for the man.
Oh, it's hilarious. Hilarious. Well, thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this, actually. Like, you guys happen to cover a subject matter we don't really talk about all that much on like our side of the podcasting world. So this is really cool. I'm happy to be here.
Hell yeah, man. And I know you and I don't know if you remember, but back in New Orleans a couple years ago, we may have like shaken the hand as we used to do back in the day and said, hey, what's up? I think I was actually sitting in your seat, which was next to your business partner and podcast partner, John Pollock. So you were gracious enough to let me sit there for like a half hour and chat with him. But you and I have never really done this face to face.
No, we have not. No. Obviously, I know you from the podcast, and yeah, we briefly had a brief interaction. But like you were working that day. That was at an ROH show, the biggest show of the year at that time. So you're busy running around. It was kind of difficult to find seating for everybody to sit at as well. So, if it takes something like this for us to finally interact, then great.
Hell yeah, man. That was a busy day. That was a highlight of my time at Ring of Honor. But highlight mostly because I got to both meet you and chat with John Pollock. I say that with hyperbole, but like that's actually pretty close to the truth as well.
That's amazing. I mean, well, listen, I'm sure somebody listening to Chocolate Croissants right now someday will get the chance to meet you guys and might feel the same way.
Well, so that's where I want to start with because and look, we've all had the pleasure to actually meet people in public that connect with us emotionally by listening to us weekly. And I started listening to you and John at least in 2013, maybe even before that. And you guys publish content very, very regularly, sometimes 4 or 5 times a week if there's special events going on. And I consume a lot of it. So, at this point for, almost a decade of my life, I've spent hours with you in some way. And no pun intended. Oh, man, I shouldn't have. You probably get the puns all the time, don't you? These waves.
I get plenty of them. Yeah. Not just for my name, but also, working with John Pollock, who was a master of them. So, yes, I'm exposed to them on a very regular basis. Yes.
You know what? I'm not going to compete with John Pollock when it comes to the pun game. But the point I'm trying to get to is the two of you, in my book, you guys are like the pro wrestling friends that I always wanted, but really couldn't find. I've connected with you guys, just your professionalism, your sense of humor, your actual passion for what you're covering, and also the friendship and the bond, the rapport that you guys have cultivated over a long time. That's why I fuck with you guys. Like you seem at least like two people that I would want to be in the room with. And in that sense, I've spent hundreds, maybe thousands of hours like in your guys' presence. And in that way, there's definitely a connection that's formed.
I really appreciate that, first of all. And, in the past, it's like, man, like I would kind of do this thing where like, really, like us? But like, I totally understand it because I'm that way with podcasts I listen to. And, podcasts, they differ in the way that like, radio used to, because these aren't confined spaces where we're stuck to, 10-minute segments, 15-minute segments, and it's not as produced or as really as artificial as, those other prior sources can seem. They are just really recorded conversations that people have. And so, by doing it on a regular basis, doing it in a routine basis, you feel like you are meeting up with your friends as sort of like the quiet friend in the corner, listening to these conversations every single week. And it's something that John and I are, I think, really lucky to have kind of like started at a pretty early time. We did our first, like, we were always involved in radio, but like as far as like, the podcasting in this format and this style goes, I think we started around like 2008, 2000, like maybe even a bit earlier than that. So to be able to not just get in on like I don't know, sort of like a technology that was relatively new at the time, but also to do it in a space that, features as much to talk about as professional wrestling with as dedicated of a fan base as professional wrestling. We were definitely very fortunate.
So I'm curious, man. I know you've been into wrestling since a young age, but correct me if I'm wrong. Did you study videography in
yes.
a college, university? Okay, so we have a lot of people that listen to these episodes, and there's this common narrative amongst a lot of people that, okay, once you get to university or college, you kind of pick the thing that you eventually monetize as a career. I'm curious, when did videography come into your life? When did editing come into your life? Were these things that you've always just kind of been tinkering with and actually putting in the work way before a formal education?
Yeah, well, for me, like I'm sure, like many people, you go through high school, and I don't know how it is in the U.S., but like in Canada, in your last year, you essentially that's when you have to apply for colleges or universities here. And I just remember like being that age, whether it be like 16 or something, and just thinking, I have to choose what I want to do for the rest of my life, like right now. And I just don't have that life experience to really be able to make that choice. So like the only thing that went into my mind as I was looking through, my catalog of programs to choose from were, could I see myself doing something related to this for 8 hours a day for, the next several years of my life at least. And the only thing that I really gravitated towards while I was in high school was this program called Communications Technology. And essentially it was like, like a multimedia course that, gave us a brief introduction to communications. And at that time, it was just sort of like the starting point of digital editing. It was, we did a bit of claymation, like those courses right now, I'm sure are way different. But like back then, I would just spend hours and hours and hours editing these projects that I'd shot with my friends, and just, time would fly by, and it told me that like, I can do this for 8 hours a day, and I was enjoying myself. And if there's something related to this that I could, devote a career to, then I think that would be it. It's something I can bear to do for 8 hours a day plus. And when it came time to choose programs, I chose the radio and television arts program at Ryerson University here. And that kind of led into studying it. I didn't exactly get an education on camera work. It was more so getting an internship at this place called the Fight Network at the time, where, you know how these places run. It's like they're pretty tiny, and they're like, hey, who's ever used a camera before? And I was like, I guess I picked one up at school. And then you learn on the job, and that was one of the good things about working for a small company like the Fight Network. It allowed me to have experience in a lot of areas, whether it be editing or camera work, or in the case of our podcast, radio.
Wei, I want to talk about something that you said there. I think about this often, that at 18 or 17 for some people, you go to university or college and you're supposed to pick this track, this major that then sets you up for the rest of your life, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought about that when I went to university the first time at 18. I think I was maybe even 17 at the time. Whatever it was, I think I was 3 or 4 majors deep before I ended up graduating with like a kind of made up interdisciplinary studies, make up your own major kind of thing, because I really just wanted to finish. I just wanted to see the thing through, however many years later that was. And after that, I was fortunate enough to then do some backpacking. And I saw all of these kids, 17 years old, that had saved up money while they were, still in high school. And instead of going right to university, they just wanted to go get some life experience. So they went backpacking. And it's something I've been thinking about a lot recently, this idea of like learning a lot about yourself by dropping yourself into an unknown environment and seeing how you fare, and really just picking up little life lessons and just going with kind of like, I always think of like, what your mother taught you of like, saying things like learning how to say hello and goodbye and please and thank you and what's your name, in like the native tongue, and just seeing what kind of lessons you learn so that you can then maybe come back, have a little bit more heightened perspective of what maybe you would want to choose to study for 4 years before you go off, into the real world and try to monetize that, as Jordan was saying. But yeah, I find that to be a very tough thing for so many people. And for me, then I ended up going back later in when I was in my later 20s, because then I finally had figured it out. But I wanted to ask you, you chose this track and you were fortunate enough to end up with something that you really enjoyed. Kind of early on for a lot of like the medium of podcasting, you chose this. If you were to enter it today, for someone who's maybe thinking of the same idea, they love fill in the blank. There's something that they absolutely love, a subject, a sport, something. Are there any like nuggets of wisdom that you could maybe offer of someone getting started now versus maybe when this was young?
Man, I sometimes I feel, number one, I feel very fortunate to be where I'm at. At the same time, sometimes I feel unqualified to be able to give an answer like that, because in many ways, like, I've just kind of followed what I wanted to do. And then I really feel fortunate in that I've been able to find work and have been able to get paid doing that thing. It's not necessarily, me setting out an intention to be like 10 years time, I want to have a full-time podcasting job. That didn't really happen for me. And, I like, going back to, I wanted to address like what you were talking about before, like being in high school and actually making the decision to take a year off so that you travel the world. That really requires, I would say, a level of, I think, self-reflection and autonomy that I wish I had, because I didn't really have that. I didn't really have that motivation, especially like, like growing up, like with Asian parents, there are definitely a lot of pressures to just go straight to school, get a job, make sure you take a year off, wasting that precious year to what? Go on vacation? That would be completely unheard of. But I would, suggest that probably most people who have that life experience end up with something that you definitely can't learn, in school. So for me, like, part of the problem when you're entering a system is that you only learn to follow the rules. You only learn to follow the track that's been set out for you. And so many people, and I feel this way myself too, when it comes time to make those big decisions in life about where you want to go once you don't have those shackles anymore. Let's say you get let go from a job, or, I don't know, for some reason you decide to change careers. That open path can be really daunting. So going back to, I guess your question is, what would I suggest for somebody who like is that focused to want to start a new career in something that they're passionate about? I can't really say, because I've followed these tracks and I've been lucky enough. I happen to be, maybe unconsciously I've directed myself into like this direction that I ended up in doing something that I've enjoyed. And I think that maybe starts off at the beginning of like, having that conversation to myself, what can I stand myself doing for 8 hours a day? And then directing myself in this direction. And this path seems to just have, been where it led to. So I would say follow what you want to do.
One thing I want to say, you mentioned that you didn't feel like you had the mental, I guess, experience or fortitude to decide to take a year off and go against what might have been expected of you. But I think just being able to actually ask yourself the question, what could I see myself doing for 8 hours a day? That's what actually stuck out to me when you said it the first time, because I certainly didn't have that conversation with myself Now I'm a little bit off the beaten path with it because I kind of always knew what I was doing, and I've been playing drums my whole life. I knew that's what it was, but I did go to college, and when I went, I did not even slightly have that conversation with myself. And again, maybe there's a bias there because I never really went to college to take it seriously for a career because I always knew what I wanted to do. It was just kind of a thing I was expected to do, and I was home and might as well, and then get some, have some fun, so on and so forth. But I think you did answer Justin's question probably in an amazing way by simply saying that. And if nothing else, anybody listening, if they find themselves in that position, that is the question to ask yourself. If you are making a career change, if you're going into a track in university for 4+ years or 2+ years, whatever it is, if you are adding something into your life as a side hustle or whatever, I think that in and of itself is a great form of a question to ask, whether it's, what do I see myself doing for 8 hours a day? Or in my free time, what would I be really happy and feel fulfilled doing? Something like that. And I think shows a lot of wisdom, and probably, some wisdom beyond your years to say that to yourself at 17 years old. So point is, don't discredit that act and that thought process in and of itself, is what I would say.
I appreciate that. Yes. In a roundabout way, like as I was kind of answering the question, I realized there were connections between those things. So it's definitely an interesting way of interpreting it.
I'm curious, Wai, at Fight Network, to me at least, it would seem that these wrestling podcasts where you're reviewing, the weekly episode of Raw, for instance, or looking back at special events from years past, I'd imagine that wasn't on the job description. Was this something that you and John just took it upon yourselves to be like, yo, this feels like a cool thing that we could do? We're in a position where a company could support us creating content like that. And maybe that was you guys actually following something that felt a bit more energizing than maybe the day-to-day.
Absolutely. Yes. My memory is a little bit foggy now, but I would say somewhere around 10 years ago when we started doing John and I, we started doing our own podcast pretty consistently. I think it also coincided with a period. Well, number one, it was just fun to do. And it was something that we didn't even consider really a part of our job. We had the equipment there, but it was stuff we did off hours. John and I would just hey, get into the booth, record it. We had this outlet attached to the radio show that we were working on at the time, Live Audio Wrestling, where we could attach, an extra bit of audio to every podcast that went up afterwards. And so we would record old reviews, or when we started, it was just conversations much like this, but they graduated into, formal and more formal, informal reviews of professional wrestling shows. And then I think there was just a period where either it might have coincided with a move, we changed offices and therefore production pretty much halted. We didn't have a whole lot going on. And I think for John too, there was a period that coincided with him probably not doing as much on the reporting journalism side as he wanted to. He was either not being given those responsibilities, or there just wasn't a need for that role. And I think as a creative outlet for John, he suggested, or he wanted to do more. And I've always been inspired by, I think, all the feedback that we would receive, even when we were just a really small podcast, but just the idea that anybody was listening and enjoying the shows, I felt like a real privilege to have that space. And in a sense, I felt a bit of a responsibility even to just do more. And so we expanded it from just old school reviews to Monday Night Raw reviews, which we continue to do to this day. At some point, Impact reviews, and it just started to grow and grow and grow. And I've always been a fan of community building, whether it be through bands I used to listen to or message boards that I used to go to for professional wrestling. And to me, that is as much as part of the fun of this job as actually creating the podcast. It's starting a Patreon, or communicating with our fans, or coming up with merchandise ideas, and just coming up with new show ideas and things like that. So sorry, I don't know if that fully answered the question, but yeah.
Yeah, dude, look, I love that you bring up this idea of community building. That is obviously one of the reasons why I've been drawn to what you guys do, because you have that sense of not only having a strong bond between the two of you, but you've created a family of podcasts, if you will, where there's other talent that are creating their own content under what's now the Post Wrestling banner. So last April, I worked Madison Square Garden. That was the last thing that I did with Ring of Honor. And I know you guys were there. I made sure that you and John had tickets through the publicist.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. But Braden and Davey, who are part of the Post Wrestling family, were my guests. They sat with me, and then I met with them a bit after the show at a bar. And then I start meeting all of these people who have like nicknames, whether it's MJ or from the Six. One of them's from the Six, and
Jesse,
there's Jesse from the Six. Yeah. I'm going to botch all these fucking names. I'm not even going to say them. Point being, I'm at a bar, and all these people are coming up to me. They know that I'm friendly with Braden and Davey. I stick out like a sore thumb because I have a suit and tie on. And these are just a cast of characters that are essentially part of the post-wrestling community. And for you guys to be headquartered in Toronto, for me to be in New York City, to be amongst your community was like just so impressive, man, and such a testament to what you guys do. As much to the fact that you guys have your own fucking shows, like during WrestleMania weekend in the host city. Like people buy a ticket to meet you guys and to ask you questions. Like that's crazy. Thinking that it just started as this like side thing for fun at your day job.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I never like stopped to, I never take it for granted. It is crazy. But, I think you guys, the three of you, would be very qualified to really kind of like relate to it all, being a part of bands, and to me, like that's always been my inspiration, is just like see what bands do to like foster like, these meetups with people. For me, it's like, a lot of people are like, we've been really, again, like I'm so fortunate to just be a part of this whole thing myself, because all of our listeners are just like awesome. Like they, occasionally there might be like one or two weird people, but even the weird people are cool. Like I'd hang out with all of them. So I think maybe some of that has to go with the fact that like John and I, maybe our podcasting style is a lot more conversational, and that we do have the space at the beginning of our shows where we just like catch each other up on our lives, rather than, if we were a straight up like news broadcast. I don't know if like there'd be perhaps the attachment to the personality. Having an ability to read feedback from our audience and, to take phone calls from our audience exposes, people to the voices that listen to us and the voices that want to be heard. And, there's some incredibly intelligent people, smarter than me, that listen to our shows, that have like, given input on various wrestling events that have taken place. And I enjoy listening to them, and I think our audience enjoys listening to them too, whether it be for their personality or for their insight.
Well, I think there's something to be said that, look, we attract what we are. So you mentioned the audience that you guys naturally attract. There are other pro wrestling podcasters out there. And I listen, some of them have call-in shows, or you can see in comment threads. It's less than mature. That's how I'll put it. You guys, and again, one of the reasons why I've been so into the content that you guys create, yes, it's conversational nature. Oftentimes, the first 30 minutes of an episode may be just you and John catching up on each other's lives. I'd imagine there's like half the audience that loves that and that doesn't, and just wants to get progressive.
Like whenever we started doing that, I was like, man, I'm so self-conscious of like, how people perceive us. And when we were starting to do that, I'm like, John, maybe we should like, stop this stuff. And I would have these conversations on air with John, like, hey, how long are we going to go before we like get to the review? And then inevitably, like I would hear from as many people that would rather us take longer because they'd rather hear that stuff than the actual review itself. And so we kept it. And I guess in that time, we've kind of, the people that have gotten sick of us have like stopped listening anyway. And the people that are left are the ones that I guess care about the wrestling as much as our personal lives.
Yeah. And to me, look, that's the magic. I mean, because that's who you guys are. When I first introduced Justin to you guys, this was like early 2016. We were living in the same house. we had our mornings pretty much free. It was like snowing out. We were watching all the primaries for the election, like the coverage of that, and we'd be working on fucking puzzles, listening to John and Wai. And oftentimes with Justin, I don't think he was as interested in the wrestling, but I'd be like, yo, dude, like, these guys are cool. They're smart. And this guy, Wai, like, he's just funny. And I kind of want to ask you about that. Like, your personality has changed over time. You used to be way more dry in the sense that you acted as like you didn't give a fuck. I'm curious, how much of that was you? How much of that was you maybe kind of playing it up a bit, knowing that people were paying attention? And did that change at some point? And did that correlate with you maybe starting to take it more seriously?
So a reflection and an insight like that is something I feel like I might be aware of, but I really have never had somebody say that to me, like, out loud. So I appreciate that, Jordan. And I would love to know more of your, analysis as to when that might have occurred, because I'm living this thing day to day, and I have no real, idea of when that might be shifting. And I think inevitably some of it comes along with just getting older. Like when I was like, even in my early 20s, I was like a pretty apathetic person, didn't really care about politics, didn't care about like too many other things. I always took the responsibility of like doing a podcast pretty seriously. But at the same time, it was like, I was a lot more likely to be like, whatever, like this was stupid. And I sometimes I'm still like that too. But as we started to do it more and more, I became more comfortable speaking on the microphone. Just the idea of like every day watching something and then thinking to yourself, how do I feel about this? Sometimes I watch something or I listen to a song or an album and it's like one ear out the other. You don't really think about it. You don't really formulate your opinion. It's become my job now to watch something, intake it, and then process it in a form that comes out of my mouth and I filter it at my own experience, in the form of the podcast. So that I think has changed. Certainly, once we became full-time podcasters, once we left the Fight Network and started to do this on our own, I always took it seriously, of course, but then once it became a job, I devoted all my attention to it, and it's taken things to a different level. We've been tackling subjects that I never thought we would be tackling. And I would say that's definitely been a big change.
Yeah, I want to talk from 2016 to what I've listened to recently. Unlike Jordan, I haven't followed, for years now. It's been, Jordan will say, hey, check this out. You got to hear what they're talking about. So I'll pick up an episode here and there. But I vividly remember sitting at the table doing those puzzles, listening and just laughing and, carrying on.
It's so cute. You guys do puzzles together.
Oh yeah, dude. It was great times. It really was great times. We were watching the craziness that was that election cycle, through the primaries and trying to figure out what was going to happen while we did this puzzle. But we had this background conversation that I understand why your community is so drawn to, because I was so drawn to it. I get it. I felt like I was sitting there with a couple of my friends. I just wasn't really echoing, or commenting on anything that was being said. I was just trying to be a good active listener, and it was awesome, and I remember at that time, just like, you were dry, you were witty, you're funny. You're just a funny guy. But now I listened to the episode, I think from last night's review of AEW. And I've listened to a couple of the more serious tone conversations of recent, and it's you're still the same guy. But it's different from what it once was. And it seems like maybe there is that era of a bit more responsibility for the audience and for the show, and making and especially sometimes leading some of these really important conversations. And I'm really curious. Were there conversations between you and John before you tackled some of these subjects, kind of maybe shifting towards some of these matters? What were those conversations like before you got into those?
Well, first, another thought that just came to mind is probably the fact that I grew up, for the most part, a pretty tired person. I was tired and lethargic all the time. And that's probably how it came across, especially in those earlier shows where, it was a side project. I had my day job. And then at the end of my day job, you get what you get on the podcast. But now this is my full-time thing. I actually often, will nap and peak for our recording. So you get me at my full energy. And that's something I've had to learn as a podcaster. But going to what you're saying, like when it comes to a serious topic, and for me, I think a lot of it started with trying to talk about Saudi Arabia and WWE's involvement with Saudi Arabia amidst the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. A show like that, really, a lot of it I think is spearheaded by John and his incredibly strong integrity as a journalist. Not just making sure that he covers all the angles, but just simply the responsibility he feels in trying to discover the truth, or at least help him, ourselves, and our audience get educated. And that's something I've been completely on board with. It's something I can't think of a better use of this platform that we've created than to use it to try to, I don't know, spread knowledge like you guys do so well. So we haven't necessarily sat down and said this is what we intend to do. It was more I think the type of journalist he became, and really the type of people we became. And we've since kind of built a rapport where anytime we've had to talk about a serious issue, it's just somewhat automatic. We understand the responsibility we have on a broadcast platform. We can't just say anything. We're this person probably did this. Oh, but you know what? He didn't do this, but maybe he did. We can't speculate. We have to handle all these issues in a responsible manner. At the same time, we he and I would just even in private probably have a pretty interesting educational conversation just amongst ourselves, like any friends would.
Yeah. So going back to what I was saying about you kind of attract what you are. The personal kind of vibe that you guys create, that's part of it. But you guys are responsible, articulate, mature human beings. You are able to wrestle with something as just serious as Saudi Arabia and the geopolitical implications of the WWE doing long-term business with them, especially of the apparent murder of a journalist, and more recently, whether it's Black Lives Matter or the Speaking Out movement, which is akin to a Me Too movement within pro wrestling that's kind of taken its course over the past few months. Or even just the ways that you guys have covered and analyzed and criticized some of these wrestling companies' response to this pandemic and COVID. You guys definitely, you're willing to go there when I think many others would be afraid to do it, maybe because they feel like pro wrestling should be this kind of fun, light form of entertainment. Or some just can't go there because they don't have the maturity or the capacity or the intellect to really do those topics justice.
Yeah. It's again, it's not something I think we originally set out to do, but in having these conversations about professional wrestling, inevitably we will run into these bigger topics, and it's I say certainly there's a great deal of responsibility in our platform, but at the same time we try to say exactly what is on our minds. I still try to maintain the feeling of me being in a room with my friend having a conversation and not really thinking about repercussions afterwards. And I guess these are things that bother us, that wouldn't feel right to continue without addressing. I'll also say a big part of I think the coverage has been being able to hear the voices that perhaps are being most affected by some of these issues, and some of our guests that we've had on tackling some of these other issues, or people who are just simply more knowledgeable about it than we are. That to me has been part of the education.
That's huge. It's got to be a challenge to try to maintain the authenticity of a conversation with your friend, but also that responsibility of, I guess for lack of better phrase, or terminology, political correctness in a way, because it's very easy when it's just you and your friend and no one's listening to kind of really let your opinions fly. And this isn't really a question, maybe just an observation, but I would imagine that that's something that you guys, that's a tool that you guys have sharpened over the years, as you've gotten very comfortable with having conversations, although it is one-on-one, you know there's a large audience paying attention. So it probably just has naturally sort of carved itself nicely into this perfect storm of the ability to express true feelings, but also respect the issues, I guess. I don't think from a neutral standpoint, because obviously I'm sure you guys have plenty of opinions that are to either side. But I would imagine that's something you've developed, through experience. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder how much of it just comes down to like the nature of what we do when we talk about a professional wrestling show. We experience something and then we filter our interpretation of it as we're reviewing a show. And, in some cases, it's not just reviewing a show, but reviewing, our feelings and our thoughts about several big life issues. And it might just sort of be the tone we've already established in the show, where people seem to be open and expecting, for our opinions about everything.
Real quick. Sorry, Jordan. Real quick. Do you find ever that you strike a nerve with people that strongly disagree with you and aren't afraid to reach out and show it, and whether it's as extreme as them trying to out and cancel you, or just simply chew you out and tell you that you guys are out of your minds? Do you ever encounter that? And if so, I think the bigger question is, how do you choose to deal with it? Because I think that is a topic that we've encountered before on this podcast in a general sense. How do you deal with that kind of intense criticism? Do you ignore it, or do you respond to it, or do you just kind of file it away into an inbox that's just a bunch of really shitty spam that you don't look at because, I guess, I don't know. There's just different schools of thought there. So I'm curious how you guys handle that.
For me, it often depends on the thought put into the criticism and the tone of the criticism. If it's just a guy saying, cussing me out, I'm like, you don't deserve a response. Yeah. But if it's somebody who wants to engage in conversation, I would, if I do have the time, would take the time. And I prefer to do these things if somebody were to respond to me, I don't know, I guess in a private message or something like that, where I can really respond, or we definitely get I would say a lot of dissenting opinion, for instance, on our YouTube channel, but even then it's having to kind of separate just people who just want to.
And sorry, not to cut you off, but that's my question is do you even read it?
I read it. I read everything.
Okay. So, and how does, I guess, are you good at disassociating from taking it personally? Because I think there's a lot of people across different variances of these kind of careers, musicians, podcasters, wherever it may be. I mean, there's a shit ton of negativity out there. Granted, you kind of get to a point, and you guys are very established, where your audience knows who you are. The people paying attention to you are there with respect. But there's still gotta be trolls and people that choose to try to, start something just for the sake of starting it. So that's my question. Do you even bother to read it, and for what reason?
Right. Like anybody who I think has, is passionate about the things that they create, I'm sure you want to know what people think about it, good and bad. And for me, it's about it's sometimes if somebody, has, it definitely is sometimes difficult to, not feel slighted if somebody has a really sharp critique of something that you've said and that you disagree with, and somebody, even though but then it's, there are times and there are moments where I definitely still try to take that person's opinion and think about whether or not they're right. We have something I'm afraid of is making people feel like they have to censor themselves because they're trying to, respond to us on a message board, or if they're calling in, sometimes I get the sense they're very polite, and that's great because I would rather that than the opposite. But I also don't want them to feel like their opinion is worth any less than mine or John's. And I try to do my best to welcome dissenting opinion, especially when it's about professional wrestling. And, you know, whether or not you enjoyed a match, like what I want to foster is conversation, not just having my opinion being broadcast. So I definitely accept, you know, criticism, but at that point, it's about like separating people who actually want to have a conversation and people who just want to, like, you know, piss you off.
Sure.
I want to piggyback off of what Matt is asking as well, because I'm curious, and I know there's a lot of people as creatives, you open yourself up to whatever may come, right?
Mm-hmm. And sorry to cut you off, but like that is my job. Like, I am taking other people's art and I'm criticizing their art, and I have, you know, sometimes like my own like dilemma of like doing that. But, you know, how hypocritical would it be of me to make a living off of criticizing other people to not be able to accept that criticism myself?
Fair enough.
Yeah. That's a great point. I think plenty of people think about what may come of the criticism for them putting out their art, and that is enough to deter them from putting anything out. But you seem so calm and collected with your thoughts and engaging with what may come. I'm curious if this has always been the case, or if this is something that you had to sharpen that axe over time to get just better at dealing with what may come, especially if you're a person who doesn't just like put out content, dump it and not look, write something on a medium, dump it and never look at it again, not engage in any kind of these back and forth conversations. Is that something that you were always great at dealing with, maybe the whatever emotions that may come and be attached with the feedback, or is it something that you had to have conversations with your friends and kind of work through to have such a great take on it?
Well, thank you, first of all. And I think for me, like, I've always prided myself on being, like, you know, somebody who is a bit more empathetic than, I don't know, maybe some. And I always, like, you know, if I read something or if I read some form of criticism, I kind of put myself in that other person's shoes to see, like, oh, okay, like, what similar experiences have I had in my past where I could relate to how this person is feeling, whether it be anger or, like, you know, even if it's a troll, like, you know, have there been times in the past where I was young and wanted to troll, you know, this celebrity on the internet or something, and I try to understand it, and you know, oftentimes I feel like I can. Sometimes you definitely can, and that's when you really ignore somebody. But like, I just, you know, rather than, I guess, respond with emotion, you try to respond with understanding. And that sounds super like new age.
No, that's good for you, man. It shows emotional intelligence, which I think is something that is much needed in the climate of our times, you know?
Because oftentimes when you respond with emotion, you just get into nothing gets solved.
Yeah.
Right.
You're fighting fire with fire.
Yeah, like I know this because my family is a family of incredibly stubborn, very hot-headed people who I absolutely love. But I've seen them get into arguments that just never have any sort of resolution. It's always been my job as sort of like the youngest in the family to be like, to try to either play peacekeeper or to just get everybody to just shut up and just, you know, not talk. And I don't know, that might have kind of fostered that within myself, to realize the more you argue oftentimes, the worse it becomes. Discussion is a different thing. Debate is a very different thing. But if you're not on that path of properly listening to other people and taking everything personally, nothing gets solved.
Yeah, totally agree. Real quick, I'm trying to play with time management right now. Matt, I know we all have a lot of questions for you, Wai. Matt has to leave sooner than later. Wai, are you willing to like hang around for an extra 30 once
Absolutely.
Matt leaves? Okay.
Absolutely.
Fuck yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna sit out a little bit because I know Matt has some questions.
Yeah. I wanted to shift gears completely, just out of curiosity. This has been a question that I've tried to put forward over the past bunch of months of us doing the podcast. I'm just curious. It's just kind of a two-part question. One, when this pandemic hit, did you feel major effects from a day-to-day basis? And two, mainly for our listeners, I think we're always trying to figure out what is your routine for success in you know, accomplishing your job the best way you can on a daily basis, and what does it consist of? Like, are you very regimented with when you wake up, what you do in the morning, your kind of morning rituals? Do you build in exercise, meditation? Are there other things you do? I'm just curious on a personal level, outside of the podcast, kind of what you're doing, whether the pandemic has affected that, or if you just are solid in that sense.
So I'm somebody who, I guess I have a pretty regular routine anyway, because our podcasting schedule is so, I guess, so packed. We essentially pretty much do like 5 shows a week. So my schedule is pretty much like, set every time.
Yeah.
However, when it comes to like waking up on time, like because so much of the podcast takes place at night, I'm horrible with that. Before the pandemic, like I would wake up at very inconsistent times, because often I'd be working until like 4 a.m., 5 a.m. sometimes. And so it'd be all over the place. However, with the pandemic, my fiance actually works in healthcare, and with the way things are, like she would typically take public transit, and I obviously don't want her to. So I've been driving her to work every morning. So I've become a morning person. Like I wake up pretty much on the dot at like, 7:30 every day. And even if it's, even if I've worked late at night, to drive her. And that's kind of like definitely been a weird change. I've never been that person my entire life. So that's definitely like made me more regimented, if anything, during the pandemic. And beyond that, depending on what I have to do that evening, I might come home and, continue to do work, have a bit of breakfast, make a bit of coffee. Or I might like take a nap if I've had a long night the night before. Naps are key. Naps are so important as you become an adult, if you could fit those in. As far as like, routines, like I've done yoga for like much of my life now at this point, but it's not something I really do regularly. It's something I always wanted to do more regularly, along with meditation. These are things that I'm well aware of and have practiced intermittently, but it's not something I ever do like sit down and focus to do consistently. More so on like, when things have definitely like gotten really bad. It's like, man, I need to sit down, I need to meditate and calm myself. That's when I do it. And I know that's not really a great way of practicing. But beyond that, exercise, I was really fortunate in being able to like move into a home prior to this whole thing happening. And one of the big things I wanted before, I guess, right after moving in the house, was to build a home gym. And so I was really fortunate to be able to buy a power rack beforehand, got a barbell and like a weight set. And I've been so lucky. Like I go to the basement and my gym is right there. Like,
there you go.
I know, Justin, like you're a personal trainer and like, you have a lot of experience doing that. So I've been like learning a lot about from Mark Ripito, Starting Strength, breaking into that book, and just like, again, obviously I could be a lot more consistent than I want to. I would like to be a lot more consistent. But it's something that I have, and it's something that really breaks up and keeps me in shape. Beyond that, like I play music, I know the three of you obviously are very experienced in that regard, but that's just something I do for as a release for fun, is play a bit of guitar, or like I got an old PS3 and I've been digging into Rock Band drums.
Hell
God,
yeah.
that shit is fun. It is so much fun.
There you go.
It's tough.
I want to briefly touch on something you said, because you're really the first guest that's brought this up with such importance, which is the nap thing, which is funny because I'm a terrible napper. Like I don't do it. If I feel tired and like I need a nap during the day, I do something completely different because I know it fucks me up big time for sleep at night. I feel weird when I nap. Like if I feel like I'm going to nap, I go work out. Like I do the opposite of what I'm feeling. But I am curious, because we haven't really, I don't think, ever talked about that on this podcast. If it's just something that you've, gravitated towards, or if you've really like ever taken a deep dive into the benefits of napping for you? Or, if you have a broader idea or just what you get out of it, I'm curious.
I don't really have a broader idea. I just know when I'm really tired and I need to like sleep. Otherwise, my AEW review, I'm going to have nothing to say because I'll be falling asleep halfway through it. So really, it's become a matter of necessity. And I mean, immediately I see the benefits after even taking a 10-minute nap, how much more alert I can be, when I'm watching a wrestling match or something like that. So I guess my experience has just been through research. But I do know there are optimal times of napping.
Yep.
Right? Like something to give you a full sleep cycle. It was like 90 minutes.
It's like 90-minute increments, is what you should do. Apparently what you should do for naps. And man, it's so interesting. I was living with my wife's parents for a bit during this pandemic before we moved into our house. And my father-in-law naps every day. And it's like, whether it's 10 minutes or 30 minutes or a random number, like he wakes up and he's just perfect. And like, it's refreshing, man. I can't do that. It's so weird. I feel off. I'm groggy. I'm in a bad mood. It really screws me up. So I truly think it's so obvious that people are wired differently in that way. Yeah. But
see, I can't do what you do. I can't just be like, oh, I'm tired. I gotta go to the gym. No way.
Yeah, fair enough.
But Matt, you're probably also going to bed at a normal time and you wake up early in the morning and I think you probably have a pretty good routine, whereas Way over here is maybe up till 2, 3, and 4 in the morning because it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, you record the podcast right after the episode?
Yes.
So what is that, like 9 to 11?
Yeah, like we typically would record from like, I don't know, like in the case of Raw, probably 11 to 1, and then it's like several hours of processing. And I'm on a high after like, doing a podcast. That's my exercise. Like that's when the endorphins get rushing in my head is when I'm talking about professional wrestling. And so it's tough for me to go to sleep at night. Yeah,
to kind of come down.
Yeah.
I think that would be a brilliant time for you to start doing your meditating, and your yoga practice.
It is very
true. That
could
could just be like built in, right? Like 1 and 1. It's like we do the review. I'm feeling great. I hit my meditation. I go to sleep. But it makes sense that then during the day, if you've only slept 3 or 4 hours, you're probably exhausted. And of course, it's such a refresher to just hit that button and go like, that's it. I'm closing my eyes. No alarm whenever I wake up. Especially you want to be, kind of primed and ready for whatever you're going to do that night, because you're doing a lot of your work at night. And correct me if I'm wrong, but something that stuck out earlier when you were talking about, you said that you take a good nap before you go and do the podcast. I think I vividly remember, and if this is how it was, that if you were going to work and then you were podcasting afterwards, wasn't there like a big thing about the Tim Hortons coffee? There was always like a big, yes, you always had your cup of coffee right?
Timmy Hose.
Sure. Yeah.
Timmy Hose.
Absolutely. That's essentially, I mean, you guys with the Patreon, that's like the branding of your whole operation.
Yeah.
It is, yeah. I mean, it was one of the consistent things I would say that's gone into a lot of our shows is just, I mean, it's the most popular drug in the world, isn't it? Caffeine. And it makes, there are definitely Monday nights where John and I both really require it just to kind of like, be up and be alert. But coffee and wrestling is initially what we wanted to call this whole thing, our podcast. I mean, I thought it was, it was cute, but I don't know if like, applying for a credential to like WrestleMania or even ROH, hey, we're with coffee and wrestling. I don't know how well that sounds.
So that's funny. I would run the press calls that we would do before pay-per-views. And I think there's a pancakes and power slams out there. So like, that would always get a response, and typically like not a favorable response from the talent.
Sure, right. So yeah, that kind of went into it. But coffee is definitely an essential, especially if you're Canadian.
Does forgive me if this is common knowledge and I just don't know, but does the name Post Wrestling, is that essentially representative of after the match you guys go on and you review it pretty much instantly post the match?
One of the things that one of the reasons why like, we chose it was because I think it means so many different things like that's related to our business. Number one, primarily, is your definition that you just suggested. We do post shows. We do reviews. After the thing's done, we do our shows. So it's post blank. But, of course, like posts are, one of the 4 pillars of the wrestling ring. So that fits in really well.
Sure.
and we post things like we post things on the internet. Like
So
there are
literal.
numerous applications, numerous puns to be made out of it, and it seemed like the perfect, easy to remember thing that sounded somewhat professional that had a URL available. So the moment that I thought about it, I checked the URL, it was good, that's it, and John was on board.
So,
Yeah.
sorry, real quick. And this will be my last question before I have to bail. And as I mentioned, I texted you guys. I'm gonna just I'll keep my eCam rolling. I'm just gonna turn off my my camera, my mic, and I'll kind of close it down a bit. But I'm curious what. Again, this is kind of a two-part question. Like, and forgive me if this is a bit too personal, but I'm curious. Like, do you feel like, one, if you can objectively look at your business and the podcast, the Patreon, everything combined, do you feel like you're at a point where it's like at a level of massive success, and or do you feel like there's a lot more to go, and within the next 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is, you have a very clear vision of expanding it even more? Like, are there goals like that? And do you also feel like you are at a point where you can, modestly say it's crushing or not?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say it's crushing, but I definitely would classify ourselves as a success. I have no shame in saying that, because I simply see the number of other Patreons that are out there, the number of other podcasters that are out there, and we're definitely like among one of the bigger success stories that have used the platform. So I consider myself, again, incredibly fortunate. And I would say that we are, successful, no doubt. To be able to do this full time is a success. Sure. As far as, big plans, I wish I could give like a better answer and be like, yeah, I have like on my mind map right here, a 10-year plan set out for what post wrestling is. I don't know what this industry is going to look like in like 5 years. I don't know I don't even know if podcasting might be around in 5 years. This shit is changing like so fast that like, I'm not really thinking in those terms. And because every day is so busy, like I just think about what we're doing the next week. And I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but like it because of the pace that we're at, it makes me focus on the present, and that's kind of where we're at.
That's good. It keeps you climbing the mountain one step at a time, and the interesting thing, I guess, is to that point, in 5 years you'll probably be doing shit that you never thought you'd be doing, that evolved slowly over time. And again, I'm always curious to see how people work, if there's a very clear path in front of them and milestones they're trying to reach, or if they're simply just kind of taking it as it comes and tackling it on a day-to-day basis.
A lot of my milestones are maybe more personal in nature, like things to do with like my personal life, perhaps starting a family, things like that. But I definitely do feel like, though, like we should, John and I, like maybe have that conversation sitting down and be like, hey, 5 years, where do we see ourselves? I think that's definitely not unhealthy at all.
For sure. Well, yeah, that's cool. I'd be curious to see if that changes at some point. But it's been interesting. It's been interesting not knowing you or anything about you, to just kind of
likewise.
Yeah, just to get a feel for it. And I'm definitely gonna ask Jordan and Justin a lot more about it, and I'll even tune in. I'm not a wrestling fan, not for any other reason than I just never grew up with it, right? It was never what I was focused on. Music was always what I was doing, pretty much 100%, and I didn't really make room for other stuff like that, even if I tried.
You don't have to explain why you were never a wrestling fan. It's like there's no shame.
Oh, for sure.
Not being a wrestling fan. It's usually the opposite. We're trying to defend ourselves why we are wrestling fans.
Got it. Well, no, I guess my point is, it's like I don't know if I had a clear reason why I would find your Patreon or your podcast, but now that I'm invested in you from even this short experience, I'm really curious to see what these guys are talking about. So I'll be tuning in. I'll be listening. So yeah, man.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And unfortunately, I do have to bail, but I'll let these guys wrap up, and then guys, just text me whenever you finish, and I'll cut off the recorder and I'll send it to Joe.
Cool, brother. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt.
Wai, thanks, man.
Thank you, man.
No worries.
So wait, I just want to kind of give my take on the name of post wrestling. I kind of took it as like a genre in the sense like you got post-punk, right? And for me, this is like what wrestling has evolved into. For me, like if I'm just gonna watch the TV product of pro wrestling, like that's not interesting to me anymore. Like quite frankly, a lot of it sucks and it's inconsistent. And I could see why someone like Matt, who didn't get into it at a young age, like wouldn't get into it now. Obviously, I've also spent a lifetime and for a couple years a career trying to defend the art of pro wrestling and all that comes with it. But I see what you guys are doing. I mean, to me, that has been the evolution of my interest in pro wrestling. It's you got the content on TV, but then you have this community aspect. You have this kind of media analysis aspect of it. So to me, I always took post wrestling as like this is just the next iteration of the genre of professional wrestling.
That's really interesting. I definitely have not thought about it that way. Like I've always kind of thought of what we do as just a supplement to the actual thing that's going on. But for you, it's
but I'm sure there's plenty of people that say I don't watch SmackDown. I just listen to you guys.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. Like you're telling me that your experience with wrestling, like it sounds like we're an integral part of your experience, and that is again, I'm grateful for that. But I never thought about it. And, but I'm like that too. Like, the more I think about it, the more I completely understand, because I definitely became a bigger wrestling fan once the internet came around and I joined message boards and, outside of watching it for 2 hours or 3 hours a week, I'm exposed to it 24 hours a day because I'm with this community that is constantly talking about the things that we just watched or the news that's breaking. So absolutely being a wrestling fan means more than just, watching the actual product. I completely understand. And that goes for music and really any other art form.
I think what would be really interesting for Matt is now just knowing you and your personality and just buying into you, right? So like for me, I haven't been really following the product as much, except for the fact that I'm a huge Every Time I Die fan. And I actually now am just seeing that Jordan is wearing an Every Time I Die shirt. So supporting Andy Williams, right? Butcher and Blade.
Right. That's great.
So I did turn it on last week. I did see this incredible match and I was trying to explain to my fiance as if she like really gave a shit of like the importance and like how cool this is, like 16-year-old me going to see Every Time I Die and like wearing the belt buckle and fucking loving them. And now look, he's living these two dreams. So
as a fan, you guys have always known that he was a wrestler, but like how serious, I guess, was he known? Because I see him on a weekly basis now, and the dude is really good. And like I always known he was involved in like the Buffalo scene, but I didn't know how serious he was. I thought he was just okay. He's a band member who just occasionally. Like, I don't know, might have gotten in the ring a couple times, but he's like really good.
From my experience, I guess he was up until recently more of a regional indie wrestler who did it for fun. Justin and I went to the Warped Tour a couple years ago, and I went up to him and introduced myself, told him I've been a lifelong fan, been very influenced by him musically at times in my life, in the music that Justin and I created. Hey, by the way, I also do this at Ring of Honor. And then, when we go to Buffalo, I'd be happy to list him, and vice versa at Every Time I Die shows for me. And I last saw him after MSG at the G1 Supercard, and I guess he was there in attendance as, I don't know, a fan or networking or whatever it may be. It came as a shock to me as well. I know his tag partner, I believe, was in TNA. And
yes, Braxton Sutter. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, he was doing it much more than like a weekend warrior type thing for fun. But yeah, look, you can't teach size. He has size. He has had massive success internationally as a creative. So like he's understood the psychology of what it is to succeed in pro wrestling, in my opinion, because it's not that dissimilar from engaging an audience emotionally from the stage.
Back in 2006, and I had to look this up real quick. They put out a DVD
real
called
quick,
Shit.
Justin, it looks like you're with us. It looks like it froze a bit.
Sorry. Yeah. Like Skype has been terrible for me lately, where my connection might break, but I'm back. Yeah.
Damn. So I was just saying, I looked this up real quick. In 2006, Every Time I Die put out a DVD called Shit Happens. So 2006, we're talking 14 years ago. There was a moment where they were at some kind of swimming pool at a hotel, and the next thing you know, Andy does. Oh God, correct me. What's the backflip and you land on the guy?
Moonsault?
Shooting star. Shooting star. I want to say he goes fallen angel, Christopher Daniels, and hits it.
Oh,
into the
moonsault.
pool.
You're right. Wait, moonsault. Yeah.
Moonsault. So we're talking 14 years ago. So this is something that I'm sure has been on his radar for a very, very, very long time. I only came hip to knowing about like the Pythons, the tag team in the local Buffalo scene, just through being a fan of Every Time I Die. But to Jordan's point, I think he's had a gimmick of Mr. Williams, this big guy crushing it on guitar for a very long time through Violent Gentlemen, through other brands, and doing kind of like, because they're big hockey fans, the Let's Go Buffalo kind of stuff. I mean, so to see someone, it's very inspiring to see someone have a dream, probably at a really young age, to then go after one of them and be as successful as they've become musically. And I'm sure we can all take so much inspiration from that. But then at, say, 40, and to kind of draw a parallel, this is kind of like how I feel about how people now love Daniel Cormier, Let's Go DC. At 42, I think they're very close in age, something of that nature, to be look, you're living all these dreams, and Cormier is now, kind of, he's got the MMA, and the Olympic accolades, but now he might go professional wrestling, commentating the whole night. I mean, man, what inspiration to see these people that we get to watch, that some of these people we grew up with watching and loving and supporting, and they're still chasing dreams.
It shows you that, like, even, and I don't know how old you guys are, but like I'm 36 now. And as I'm approaching 40, sometimes like you feel like your window of like, being malleable and having, options seems to close. But I mean, I think that's a fallacy, I mean, obviously as your responsibilities grow, if you have a family, that can change. But, I don't think it should stop you from, I guess, being curious and being, perhaps, ambitious enough to want to pursue other interests than what you have already achieved success in.
Yeah. So I'm 34. Justin's a year and a half younger. Look, on paper, the narrative of my career seems absurd in the sense that I've had the success in music, but I'm also a licensed psychotherapist. Found ways to combine the two of those things. And
yeah,
then,
what you do is really cool. Like, I mean, I always knew like you were attached to something like that, but like, seeing like before I was doing this, I looked it up, and it was like I was incredibly impressed and really interested in what you do with Beatwell.
Thanks, man. That's super kind.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's like enough for like one career to try to carve out. And then, in my early 30s, I'm like, let me find a way to get Ring of Honor to create a job for me, while still being a psychotherapist and still being a musician in the world. And at least for me, and maybe it's the same for someone like Andy or Cormier, it just felt like something I had to do. I could have invested more energy into Beatwell, and maybe it would have grown more by now. But it was like, man, if I didn't really try to fight for something legitimate in pro wrestling, then I would just live with regret, and the experience of regret, even if I'm just imagining it in the future, like that was just too fucking painful to ignore and to not fight for the dream of pro wrestling. So look, I hope when I'm 60, I still get fire in that sense, for maybe something. I mean, to me, it's all the same. It's all just community building. It's emotional storytelling, whether it's music or I'm giving a keynote presentation to a psychology conference, or I'm working within pro wrestling. To me, there's a through line, and it all makes sense. I'm just kind of tasting it, kind of like from all these different perspectives.
No, that it makes total sense. And I think if you're somebody who has achieved success in one area, you have those skills of communication, of being able to, educate and to, I guess, convince somebody, hey, like, I'm passionate about this. I will see this through. You have a track record, and that's something you could take to all sorts of different fields. That's
the key. And I think that's really what this podcast is about. I mean, in the past couple months, we've had an Air Force bomb technician, We've had fucking Donnie Wahlberg. We've had audio engineers. We've had clinical scientists and researchers, and now we've had a pro wrestling podcaster. And
yes.
hell yeah, man. And but the thing is, it's these skills that are translatable amongst all these different things. I'm going to say four of us, including Matt, we've tasted success in different ways. And once you have that, it's hard not to believe in yourself, because we've proven to ourselves that we can make something happen. Here's what I want to pivot, because, Wai, you came to a crossroads a couple years ago when essentially the Fight Network was acquired by a different company, and you and John and that department was essentially let go. I'm curious if you're willing to share, like, what was that like for you? I mean, for me as a fan, like, I was sitting at my Ring of Honor desk fucking heartbroken. So I couldn't even imagine what it was like for you. I reached out to Braden. I didn't feel like I had a relationship quite like that with you to reach out personally. But I'm curious, like, can you bring us into your thought process, into the emotions of it? And did you have feelings of doubt within yourself, or even in what you and John could do independently?
Yeah. So at this point, it was back in October, like October 30th, 2017, like was the date, and it was a Monday. And we were getting set to like record Raw that day. But that morning, I was called into the office because of an announcement. And I think when you get that text from your boss, you kind of know what's up. John was the first to be let go. So he was the first contact that I had. And he told me he was let go. And I was pretty much expecting the same. See, what I didn't know was whether or not they were going to let me go, or they were going to bring me in specifically to tell me that they had let John go, and that they were going to move forward with whatever I was doing. Because our jobs were pretty different. John was a reporter, I was a videographer and editor. My biggest concern was the latter, that they would keep me but let John go. Because that means we would have to break off what at that point to me was like, I think the thing I enjoyed doing the most with my job attached to Fight Network. I enjoyed the other stuff too, but like I think there was something a bit more special about the podcast and really fostering the community that John and I had built. And at that point, I would be faced with the option of whether or not I would quit and basically lose out on a source of income, or continue and not be able to do the podcast. When they let me go, I was happy. Like, John and I were both pretty frustrated at that point in our careers because of our lack of mobility. There were a lot of kind of weird things going on with, I think, conflict of interest, because our company had purchased TNA Wrestling. And while we weren't covering, at least I wasn't covering, Impact Wrestling, it just got into a weird space. And for us to be able to properly do our jobs, even reviewing WWE, I think we ultimately, like, we were having conversations about leaving, John and I, quitting as late as the Friday before that Monday.
Wow.
So we kind of wanted this, and to be able to like be let go, to be given a bit of a severance package that we can at least, walk away from after working there for 10 years. It was exactly the kick out the door that I think we both wanted. And knowing that I was still going to work with John, that we were going to plan on doing this thing on our own anyway, trying to give it a go, it just like made for us the big life decision that we were struggling to make anyway, of whether or not we were going to break off and try this on our own. And we did.
That's amazing. Was Patreon the obvious next step for you guys?
Yes, it was. We saw, again, like having those conversations prior to being let go about what we would do if we were to be let go. We were looking at the landscape at what the viable options are to make this, to try to make some money, out of doing these things, because we would no longer have the corporate backing. And there are very successful news websites out there that have kind of like formed their own systems, but something but it always seemed like so technically beyond us and what we were capable of. But something that had just been created and our friend Jay Hunter from OSW Review had seen great success with was Patreon. We saw how well he was doing. We communicated with Jay, asking him about his experience. Jay happens to be somebody who is incredibly knowledgeable about Patreon and actually like was probably one of the first to like achieve success, at least within our little wrestling ecosystem. So he gave us such a great lesson about the importance of like fostering a community, and that's all stuff I enjoy anyway. So it all worked out like to I think my strengths to John's strengths, and it became like the best option for us. Yeah.
There's something really interesting about the gift of having someone do something for you that ends up being so favorable, right? In that moment when you're already contemplating walking out the door. It's kind of like when I hear like Dana White talk about, if someone is contemplating kind of hanging up or leaving their gloves in the octagon, you might as well go. And maybe there is something on the horizon for you. But for you guys, you already knew what maybe would be the next step. When you received that gift of going and now deciding to bet on yourself, I'm curious if betting on yourself, the two of you in this together, which is always easier than going at it solo, for you personally, betting on yourself, was that always something that you were really good at doing? Or was it something that a few ducks had to start to line up before you were like, okay, now I can jump in the water?
Yeah. So, I mean, I kind of take that question to ask if I'm like a risk-taking person, like if I'm somebody who, yeah. And I would say
the end of the cliff without the parachute, without a safety net, and were you always good at just jumping, or were you like, well, I'm also a little calculated, which a lot of people are, that you want maybe a smaller safety net that would like potentially catch me if I jumped and fall?
I really admire people who are like that. I'm not one of those people. Like, it goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier about people deciding to take a year off to really discover themselves. I'm somebody who like, I think grew up like, caring a lot about maybe what my parents' expectations were of me. And that meant, following the course to kind of like their design of like going straight to university and making sure that I get a good enough job. The fact that I was able to choose a career in something like the arts, like television, was already, I think, a level of autonomy I was pretty grateful for. But, I don't know I don't think I would consider that risk taking. Like, I've heard people take risks, and that means, abandoning their livelihood in order to do something. I think we were approaching that point, honestly. Like, if we were still working at the Fight Network and we didn't see anything change in like 6 months, John and I had kind of set a cutoff, to be like, if nothing changed for us by this point, we would quit. So we were approaching that point, but I would have met that period with a great deal of like, oh man, concern and hesitation. And thankfully, I didn't even have to make that decision because it was made for us. But to answer your question, I don't consider myself that type of person. I wish I was. And, again, if in the future I'm faced with a scenario like that, I don't know how I would react. But like, I hope that it would be with a bit, rational thought and also courage as well.
Go for it, Justin. I know we're quite over the next question.
I'll make it real quick. It might just be more of a comment than a question, but Wai, you are to Jordan as I think Ariel Helwani is to me. Someone who Jordan actually said something really brilliant. His take on what post wrestling is, kind of the commentary was more important than watching the actual product. I think until that point, I could never really figure out why a post-fight press conference to me was always even more exciting than watching the pay-per-view or the product itself.
Absolutely. Yes.
Especially in the days when like, and I'll throw a wrestler out there, especially in the days when Matt Riddle. Like when he would be on and you'd have like a long panel of people and he'd be at the end because he was like a young fighter at the time. And he was very funny in that, before he was let go. From the UFC, but even in those days it was great. But even now, the format that they have now, I want to know the numbers, more of the insider, the inside track of what was really going on behind the scenes, kind of, and sometimes even more so than what was going on during the fights. And then my Monday used to be consumed with, the MMA Hour was was like it became a 6-hour show, and I would consume that all freaking week. And I would be saying to myself, like, man, I'm in school to be a dietitian. I should be consuming more nutrition-based stuff. But there was just this thing in me that like gnawed at me of like, but this is what I really want to sink my teeth into all the time.
Well, if you wouldn't mind me speaking to that, like,
please.
When it comes to combat sports, we're essentially talking about an action scene in a movie. And you don't watch a movie just for the action scene. You watch a movie for the action scene and then the denouement, like what goes on after that, how they're reacting, what result, like what changes in their lives occurs after a winner and a loser results from this fight. And that's what makes, those post-fight press conferences so interesting. That's what makes something like Helwani's podcast so interesting, because they dive into the stories, the reactions of what occurs after this epic battle. So I always like watched MMA the same way I watch professional wrestling. It's for storylines, it's for characters, and of course it's also the technique as well. But that's what makes combat sports, I think, so fascinating.
Yeah, and real quick, I just want to finish with look, I agree with you. I think you can go and watch, like for me, I can watch a great movie, but I'd rather watch the documentary about the movie, because and granted, I'm sure the movie is great too. I want to watch that, but then I also want to hear like what were the thoughts and the process behind all of this, and like where was the magic in that, right? So like when a Demetrius Johnson lands a move that looks straight out of a video game, people want to know like what was the thought process in that. And of course, in professional wrestling, a lot of those big spots are these sequences that are really, really well orchestrated. It's like a great dance, right, or a great play. In MMA, it's a little more a momentary decision. In that split second, you had to make that decision. But and so yeah, I think that in this conversation, it finally, clicked a little switch of like, oh, that's how I can eloquently, explain to someone like what I love so much about the sport that I love so much, which is great. So I like that nugget of wisdom, that I can now convey to someone that I maybe will have a conversation with. Jordan, I want to thank you for that. But what I wanted to also bring up was, it's really interesting to hear you say you kind of gave yourself, you and John gave yourself a 6-month window. Is that what you were saying?
Something like that.
Right. It's interesting because when I think about Ariel Helwani, he was working at a smaller publication and he kind of gave himself a deadline as well. And that really resonated. It's funny to hear that same kind of story. He said, and I think, he felt the pressure from his parents. And he was saying that if I don't make it he gave himself a very specific date. If I don't make it by this date, then I'm going to close up shop and kind of go a safer route. So it's just so interesting to hear two people that my brother and I hold in such high regards, kind of have the same conversation and also be such wonderful contemporaries. So I just wanted to comment on that look, I think it's awesome. Sometimes we do give ourselves a bit of a deadline, and it's not always going to pan out in our favor. And that's okay. We can still be kind to ourselves that at least you went for it. This is for anyone listening that's thinking about something maybe they've always wanted to do. Give yourself 6 months to take a shot at this thing. At least you won't end up with the capital R regret that you never did it, that Jordan, I think was talking about, instead of going beat well route, taking some chances. And we still should be taking those chances, of course.
But I want to add something to the conversation about risk taking.
Please.
Like, I'm sure, I know so many people, I'm sure you guys do as well, who spent 10 years plus in higher education, come out with hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans, and now they're a doctor or a lawyer or something like that, and they hate it. Like, to me, like, that's a huge risk.
Yeah.
To invest all of that, and then to get to that point when you start earning money and you get this gut feeling, and maybe the gut feeling was there all along and you didn't respect it, and you gave in to external pressure, whether it's parents or society or a teacher or whomever it may be. But to me, like, that's the ultimate risk. And I have empathy for that because when I took a break from music, I entered the master's program in clinical psychology, and it felt like a safer, more predictable route. I could visualize that if I do these things, then I could be doing this job for this kind of money. And within the first semester, I had to respect that gut feeling that if I don't show up in the world as a musician, as a creative, then I'm going to be fucking miserable for the rest of my life. So for me, it was actually, in my definition of like risk taking, doing the safe thing sometimes is like the ultimate risk and not worth doing.
Sure.
That's really fascinating. I suppose like when we're talking about risk, oftentimes we're talking about money, aren't we? And people are, consider the risk to not have a full, a source of income, rather than thinking about the risk of happiness and not having happiness. And it seems like you are prioritizing happiness over finances, which is something I always try to think about.
Yeah, look, when if I'm afforded like time to reflect on my life on my deathbed, I'm not going to think to myself, man, I wish I made another $1. But I would have thought, man, I wish I really like tried at pro wrestling, to play in that sandbox for a bit of time. And I know what it's like to work with people who prioritize money. And look, I respect it because it's survival, obviously. But we also live in a culture that is consumerist in nature, is capitalistic in nature, and that puts the dollar on the pedestal. In fact, we live in a culture that tells us that we're awful and we're broken. So we spend our hard-earned money to buy services and products to create the illusion that we'll be happy. So the whole thing is just fucked up from the inside out. That for me, it just makes sense. Like, I think if you have a work ethic and you're willing to just show up and try, and you know how to deal with people, interact with people, learn from interactions, then if you do something that gives you energy, you'll find a way to make a buck off of it.
Sure. And I wanted to just mention, like, this is not to discount people who actually truly like are passionate about like owning businesses or being a stockbroker or being an accountant even. Like there's an art to all these things that is beautiful if you really like look into it. I guess we are more so talking about people who are reluctantly taking on careers strictly for, I guess financial gain.
Or just the illusion of security in that sense.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Look, I think we're all talking about energy, right? You gotta follow that energy, right? And so if you feel passionate about something, look, I think we've all been there. I know Jordan and I have talked about this before. I think Jordan has shared this publicly on the podcast. There's things like you show up on day one to go do something, and this could be that you spent 10 years to go be a doctor or a lawyer, right? This could be that you spent 4 years in a degree to be in the marketing field, and you show up on day one and you get this overwhelming sense of like, oh shit, this feels awful. And I think it's really important to follow that. But if you show up in anything, and of course we're not discrediting in anything that someone does, right? If you show up and you're passionate about it and you get energized from it, you got to follow that. Why would you run away from the thing that gives you the most energy, that makes you feel the best? For whatever it is, it might be something that leads you on a path to this monetary success, and it might be a thing that really doesn't.
Should you do it though with the goal of making money, or are there things that you can strictly enjoy as a hobby without putting that pressure on yourself?
Absolutely. Right. I know what it's like to have music not be fun anymore because it became too much of my business. Mm-hmm. And when I entered pro wrestling, from that perspective with Ring of Honor, I was hyper aware of protecting that fandom within me, of not letting the stress and the politics and the frustrations of the business of pro wrestling interfere with my ability to still love it once it was over. And I didn't know if it would be over I gave myself internally 12 months. I said to myself, even if I fucking hate it 4 weeks in, I'm still going to stick it out for a year just to kind of respect the opportunity and to see if things would turn around, and also to fight for the changes that I wanted. So I didn't know if it would last a year or 5 years. I was pretty clear it wouldn't last for like a decade. But I knew I wanted to protect the passion that provided me enough fight to make that a reality in the first place.
And what led to you leaving?
I accomplished my goals. And look, the vision was never work my way up in pro wrestling. Because for me, working my way up in pro wrestling would really be owning my own promotion. And that didn't seem that fun or realistic. I want to create my own thing. I want to touch people like in a hand-to-hand combat type of way. And Ring of Honor and quite frankly, pro wrestling didn't allow for that. And plus, like, I'm not cut out working in a fucking office. I'm not cut out working in a corporate structure. So I learned a lot about how to play in that environment and the social gymnastics that comes with it. But to be quite frank, like, I got to work out a sold out Madison Square Garden. I was given the responsibility of creating the branding and communication of that event. Hey, Jordan, we booked the event. Like, we booked the fucking garden. Like, go do.
That's amazing.
And I'm not giving myself the credit, clearly, but we did sell out in 17 minutes after the public on sale. I got to put on a suit. I got to work in the actual venue. And then it was like, well, what else am I going to do here? I mean, if I had goals, clearly that wasn't a goal because that seemed so unrealistic 2 years prior. But I felt like I got to do it. I scratched the itch. I got to play in the sandbox. And now there's a bunch other more sandboxes and sand castles that I want to play in and build myself. So that's really what it came down to.
Oh, you were certainly like there, like at the peak. And
for sure.
Yeah.
That does not go unnoticed. That does not go unnoticed. I guess to start like taking this thing home, Wai, I want to kind of circle back. I was playing it up for dramatic effect when I was talking about, like, we've had clinical researchers and we've had A-list celebrities and we've had now a pro wrestling podcaster. That's funny to say. I think of you as a genuine hero of mine because of that. And then that kind of ties into what we're talking about, living a life of purpose and passion, and yet still being able to earn a living doing it, even if pro wrestling podcasting wasn't one of the majors at your university. The fact that you were not only willing to try, but you've been succeeding in doing it, and it seems like, at least from my perspective, you guys haven't like lost any integrity in the process. If any, it's only been strengthened in these recent conversations you've been having in the past few months. To me, dude, like that, you are a hero in my book because you are what I aspire to do in my own unique ways. So I just wanted to say that because I didn't want you or anyone else to feel like I was minimizing what you do as a profession. In fact, I put it on a pedestal.
No, I appreciate that. It's amazing because, like, I think in your own ways, I admire the two of you and Matt as well for pursuing what you guys have done in your careers, whether it be in, like physical training, like something that I wish I was a lot more, I think, in tune with myself, or in the career of music. Like, these are things that I think are incredible achievements that I look at as, not very, very few people are able to acquire. So I appreciate that. As far as like integrity goes, I really appreciate that you mentioned that, because it's something that is incredibly important to John and I. And it didn't always, like, we didn't think about that 10 years ago. Like, we're just like, kind of like, hey, come into this microphone. Let's talk about this stupid wrestling show from like 1997. Scott Plitsky, ha 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 ha. We weren't really thinking about integrity then, but like as the responsibility grew, and I think as we grew as people, it became more and more important to us. And again, like, so much of this, I credit John Pollock completely. He's the best, like, at being able to not just investigate stories, but also to be able to present them in as professional of a manner as he is. And I'm so fortunate that I get to do podcasts with him, like, on a daily basis. So I owe so much of my success, obviously, to working with him. But like, it's always been incredibly important to both he and I that we, even if like we've turned down so many like advertising opportunities, we've turned down like a whole lot of things, like free such and such, just because we didn't want to have our Yeah, we didn't want to be like, restricted in what we've been able to say, and we didn't really want any sort of conflicts of interest. We're incredibly careful about that. And we're lucky enough to be able to have that freedom because we are supported by listeners. We're not attached to anybody. We owe no bias to anybody. And that's something that, again, I'm really privileged to have, but something we work really hard to try to maintain.
Yeah, and whether it's intentional or not, I mean, you guys are playing for the long term. I mean, you're built to last because of that. You're not taking the short-term money on the table. You're showing up, you're honest, you respect the audience. And, granted, the amount that I pay for your service each month is relatively minimal. I feel good paying it.
It's not minimal to me, honestly, because we used to do this shit for free. Everything is for free. Like, anybody can get anything for free. Their hours of entertainment are filled with free shit. So the idea that anybody would even pay $1, much less $6 a month for what we do, it was mind blowing to me when it first occurred. So I don't take that for granted.
Well, I appreciate that. And the funny thing is, it's like, look, I may not even consume the content that I'm paying for at all times because you guys still put out a lot for free. Mm-hmm. So for the $6 a month that I invest, I may not listen to that content every month, but it just makes me feel good to invest in you and John as human beings. And that's a job well done on your guys' part.
And again, it's like, how many creators can say that they have, people who feel that way about them? And it's something I don't take for granted. Imagine if, obviously Patreon wasn't something that was around all the time, and you might show your support by buying a ticket to a concert or buying an album or something like that. But to be able to have this direct of a relationship to the point where I know the name of the person who is subscribing every week or every month, it really is such an incredible way to, again, build that relationship between, consumer and creator.
Yeah. And look, I think the timing, obviously for Ring of Honor, the timing worked out as perfect as it could, given the wave that I got to ride there. But it seems similar in your case as well. The time that you guys were let go, you already had this runway of 10 years to build trust and connection with an audience. The technology of Patreon was mature enough where enough people knew and trusted that enough, and you could leverage that as an in-between between you and the consumer. And the environment of pro wrestling was in a ripe space as well. To the earlier point, it was literally post-wrestling. Fans, in many ways, were more interested in other experiences around the art of pro wrestling.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, especially in that time, we were really talking about the height of the indie boom. Mm-hmm. And really what's resulted now in, the formation of AEW, but also an awakening of everybody to things going on in other parts of the world, whether it be in the UK or Japan. So there was a lot more to cover besides what was just there for WWE. And yeah, timing really is always everything. And we were, I guess, very lucky then because I mean, man, if we were let go right now, how successful would we be? I'm not really sure. That's really hard to answer, all these what ifs.
It's hard to tell. I definitely believe in luck. Look, I met Joe Koff on a plane. That was That was coincidental. That was serendipitous. Whatever word you want to choose. So yeah, that is involved. But then it's a matter of what the fuck do you do with the opportunity presented in front of you?
No, for sure, absolutely.
Justin, I'm curious if you have any last things to ask before we hop off.
Look. One last thing I wanted to say, of course. Look, you just brought up the Joe Koff story, right? I mean, look, you can have all the things presented right in front of you on a silver platter, but then it's how do you deal with it? What's your next move? What's your actionable step? What do you take, right? For Jordan, you could have easily just said, oh shit, I have an opportunity here, and you could have just shied away because the moment was too big, right? And I think for a lot of people, we start to play that reel in our head of all the things that could go wrong if we go about this. I mean, look, we're 3 years, I think, into a podcast. I still have a lot of those feelings of shit, we're about to go do a podcast. Make sure you get the, the marbles out of your mouth and here we go. And there's a responsibility to this. And what are you going to do with the opportunity, right? I mean,
sorry, I'm just thinking so much of like Eminem and 8 Mile. I'm thinking of the intro to Lose Yourself. Like,
yeah,
this
right.
playing in the background for this entire conversation, but it's exactly that.
Oh man, I love that last sequence. That whole, was that Papa Doc?
Yes, something like
Yeah, he
that.
just
Yes.
slays him. Like, okay, Cranbrook. Okay, anyway.
You know, I've never seen that movie.
Oh, you got to watch it.
I haven't seen most. I really just listened to reviews of Friday Night SmackDown.
Look, the last point I wanted to make, the biggest thing to all this, for anyone listening, all the opportunities can be right there in front of you, but if you haven't put the work in, you might not be ready to shine when you're on the stage and the lights are shining brightest. You might not be ready for it. But to both of your credits, when it comes to this world of professional wrestling, both of you put the work in. So when the opportunity came, and look, for some people, it's like, oh, you got in on the infancy of something great like podcasting or YouTube or something else, right? And then it was just like serendipitous that like, hey, Patreon is a thing, or like crowdfunding or crowdsourcing for certain things was like a relevant thing that like, oh, I can tap into this and we can be independent. You know, like if it wasn't for those things, maybe all of this potentially wouldn't be what it is, right? But if you don't put the work in, you know, you find that thing that you're super passionate about, the thing that like you're up at night thinking about, that you wish, to Jordan's point, you had a friend to have these conversations about. If you haven't put that work into it, then it all might be for nothing. So if there's something, anyone listening to this, right? If there's something you've been thinking about that you've been like, on the fence of like, should I, shouldn't I? Find an extra 5 minutes in your day outside of the normal things you do and start chipping away at that thing. Because if you put the work in, when the opportunity comes, if it does come, and it may come for anyone, right? You'll be ready at bat to just swing for the fences. And I think that's a huge just nod to both of you, that you both put the work in. You guys are so passionate about the things that you do, right? And especially when it comes to this professional wrestling. That
see, when you say like put the work in, I'm a lazy person by nature,
but
so I have
so long, you know. I mean,
because I enjoy it, because that's my point. You know,
right.
when you say put the work in, I think make sure it's something you enjoy, and it goes back to, you know, saying, what can I see myself doing for 8 hours a day and not get sick of it? If you enjoy what you're doing, it shouldn't feel like you're necessarily putting the work in. Certainly, there are going to be many days. Like, there's still many days where I'm like, man, like, this is a really long day. This is a really long show, and I have to, like, you know, watch this thing. Like, it gets overwhelming, definitely. But for the most part, it's like the process is you know, the privilege.
Right.
Fucking
and
love
you keep a tough schedule. I mean, if you're consuming all of the content that is the professional wrestling world, plus other things, that's a huge undertaking and a massive endeavor, because the train keeps rolling. Right. And it's long, and there's a lot to dive into. So like, from my perspective, and I think this would be great for someone like Matt and anyone who's not into wrestling, listening to the review, I was so in, and I would call Jordan as I'm driving home from work, and I'm like, I got to see this clip, you know, the orange juice dropping on Jericho's head. I was like, the way that they explained it, or this thing that Taz said, I was like, I got to hear all these things. And I mean, cool. That could be just enough. I don't even really honestly have to see the product. I could just listen, kind of like, you know, you could just watch wrestling, right?
Yeah, like that's not an experience I'm really familiar with, you know, like and it's an experience I hear a lot from people, that they you know, really like use our shows to supplement their experience, and then they'll go back and rewatch, but it's not something I'm familiar with. So to even like hear about that process is really interesting to me that you have.
Well, I love the quote, "The process is the privilege." That is the pull quote, my friend Wai. Dude, thanks so much for making time and extra time, and I don't know if you took your nap prior to this, so you could give your full energy.
I dropped my girlfriend off, and then I had a straight 4 hours, and I'm like so good right now. Yeah, amazing.
Dude, this was such a pleasure for me, and I know for Justin and Matt.
Likewise.
Yeah.
I mean, I heard you on the Up Next podcast. I had always known of you, of course, Jordan, and but I didn't know how deep you were, like, you know, in I guess everything that you do. And I think what you do is incredibly fascinating. I met you, Justin, now too. I think all three of you are incredibly fascinating. So love what you're doing with chocolate croissants, and I look forward to listening to the show.
Thank you, brother. I do want to say for those watching on YouTube, I am most proudly a fucking Wai Ting guy.
That's amazing. You don't sell that anymore.
Well, then this is history in physical form. That was actually for like a year the only shirt I would perform in.
That's unreal.
I know, right? Dude, I'm so motivated by absurdity, and there was something about doing that felt so natural and lovely. So I appreciate you for being that face on my chest during all of those shows.
I am proud to be the face of absurdity. I'm so proud. That's awesome.
This feels like a culmination of a long game kind of thing of like, hey, look, you know, now
I need a Jordan Goodman shirt. Really, I need a chocolate croissant shirt.
Yeah, we probably should do that. Look, well, talking about like the culmination of things. Look, I've told this many times, and Wai, I do not want an answer, yes or no, either way right now. But the only reason I fought so hard to get that job at Ring of Honor is so that one day I could be a guest on the Post Wrestling Christmas show. So again, I'm taking all of my public opportunities to state that publicly and putting it out into the world. I honestly do not want you to say yes or no right now, but I'm just gonna leave it as it is in this moment.
Then I won't give you an answer. You will have to wait and see.
It took me a year and a half intentionally to even ask for an opportunity at Ring of Honor. And so I am playing the long game, my friend. I'm playing a long game.
You know what? Like, we'll maybe start a petition online, see like how many signatures you can get. I imagine next to being cast in a Marvel film, this might be one of the tougher spots to get a spot on the Post Wrestling Christmas show. So we'll see what support you can drum up.
Look, man, I'm happy to just
Wait, was that a pun? You hear that?
It's not even intentional, but yes.
Okay, guys, facebook.com/groups/chocolate croissants. It is our private, inclusive community of creatives from around the world. You are welcome to join us there. We would like you to join us there, quite frankly. If you're listening to this conversation on your podcast app, you can actually see the face of Wai Ting that I wore on my chest as I performed for a year in the band Reindeer by watching this on youtube.com/chocolate croissants. Wai, thank you so much. This was such a pleasure. You know, they say never meet your heroes, but you
just leave it at that. Just leave it at that.
I'll just leave it at that.
Nothing else.
Wai, all the post wrestling, all that, I will add it to the show notes. But I honestly, like, all jokes aside, I want to sincerely and publicly thank you for being yourself and sharing it with the world.
Oh, thank you so much, man. Thank you to you, Justin and Matt, for creating the space that, I mean, like I said, you know, we don't often get into conversations like this on our podcast. So this is an outlet for me to be able to have a lot of conversation that I don't usually get to have. So I appreciate it. This is the type of conversation I'd be happy to, engage in even off air. But the fact that we get to broadcast it and share it with an audience is, you guys are doing a service for people like myself. So thank you.
Appreciate that, brother. I'll definitely be in touch sooner than later. And for everyone else listening, come hang out with us in the Facebook group. We will be back next week with another episode of the Chocolate Croissants podcast. This is one of the more formal outros that I've ever done. So I'm going to take these bells, I'm going to throw them across the room. I'm going to hit this cowbell 3 times, and then I'm going to say bye-bye.